Venezuela's government reveals heaps of new evidence which points to corruption within opposition ranks. Egypt's former president Mohamed Morsi has died after appearing in court. And the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States calls for a unified CARICOM stance on Venezuela. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Venezuela's Minister of Communication, Jorge Rodriguez, held a news conference a short time ago, releasing damning new evidence regarding corruption by the Venezuelan opposition. Rodriguez demonstrated screenshots of WhatsApp messages between Juan Guaidó and other opposition figures, implicating them in a series of acts of corruption. The minister said that the situation has become so grave that even the media, which is typically pitted against the government, has recognized the criminal activity. This includes the financing of destabilization attempts from Colombia. The government says that the intention was never to provide humanitarian aid.
Where are the $3 million of the Venezuela aid concert? Where are they? A tweet was published about that. Juan Guaidó directly pocketed that money. There's a lot of evidence in which Juan Guaidó personally asked for that money, those $3 million. Remember, they were going to bring together $150 million. That multimillionaire English imbecile. But in the end, it was just $3 million. And they left all those workers who helped them with the stage and the sound, etc. They were never paid because they didn't use those $3 million to pay the people. A right-wing extremist says here, confirmed, the payment of the 2020 bonuses constitutes the first mega corruption of Guaidó's administration. This was said by the terrorist Robert Alonso. Calderón Berti, go and look for the blank check that you left at the hotel in Cúcuta. Go and look for it because it's a crime to issue a blank check. We have here what was posted on the Pan Am Post Spanish website with all of the forged and inflated invoices.
Egypt's former president Mohamed Morsi has died after fainting in a courtroom. According to state TV in Egypt, Morsi collapsed inside the court where he was facing charges of espionage, dying shortly afterwards. He was 67 years old and had been ousted by the military in 2013 after protests against the rule. Morsi was a senior figure in the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mohamed Morsi al-Ayad passed away during the espionage court hearing. The deceased asked the judge to speak. He was permitted, and after the session, he was adjourned and his body has been moved to the hospital and the necessary procedures be taken.
Cuba's foreign minister is continuing his official tour around the Caribbean, which began a week ago. The top diplomat took to Twitter to post about his cordial meeting with the Governor General of Barbados, Dame Sandra Mason. Earlier in the day, Rodriguez visited the monument to the martyrs, which faces the waters, where Cuban Air Flight 455 was downed in 1976. There, he and Barbadian officials paid tribute to the victims of that terrorist attack, which claimed the lives of 73 innocent people. There is a call for a unified CARICOM stance on Venezuela as heads of government of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, are meeting in Antigua and Barbuda. Outgoing OECS Chairman Dr. Ralph Gonsalves made the appeal at the opening ceremony.
Otherwise, we are going to have a situation in which we are unequally yoked, which is really the situation in CARICOM. And an integration movement in which we are unequally yoked will not long survive. In CARICOM, we have important work which we are doing in functional cooperation, important work in security, foreign policy coordination, though the chaos between us over Venezuela is something which we have to sort out.
St. Lucia's Prime Minister Alan Chesney says climate change is high on the agenda for the OECS, noting that islands in the Caribbean are unable to face the global phenomenon alone.
Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, this problem is not going to be resolved the way we would like it to be, which is that we would not have a climate warming taking place to this extent. Because unfortunately for us, as was expressed by my colleague from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there is irreversible harm that has already taken place. And so there are things that have already been lost that cannot be regained. And what we are talking about now is really survival of our society. But we ourselves have had to learn to be able to adapt in moving forward. I thought it was eloquently put by the member from St. Vincent and the Grenadines that climate warming has no prejudice. Rich, poor, big, small, black, white, Indian, it makes no difference. That this is really an issue in which we cannot fight through traditional mechanisms. That this is something that we're going to have to fight ourselves, and it's going to require us to take a lead in the region.
Meanwhile, St. Lucia's Prime Minister says the OECS as a bloc has to be more proactive in addressing the European Union's blacklisting of several Caribbean countries. He said this must manifest at the U.S. Security Council, as voting should be unanimous for Caribbean voices to be heard.
We are not expressing our egregiousness towards what is taking place against us sufficiently. And the only way that small countries like ours can express our voice is at the UN and is how we vote at the UN. And there are times when collectively that we must vote a particular way, not for the motion that is on the table, but sometimes to make a point.
It's confirmed the 4th University of the West Indies campus has been finally approved for Antigua and Barbuda. Prime Minister Gaston Brown made the announcement, saying he expects to receive the official communication by Tuesday. This as the country moves to have the campus opened in September with at least 1,000 students. Brown said reservations about the campus expressed by 3 countries have been lifted. He had been in discussions with the UE Vice Chancellor on the issue.
Now, what we're doing here is that
talks are underway in Haiti between President Jovenel Moïse and representatives from various sectors in an effort to find a solution to the ongoing political crisis in the nation. These discussions are expected to pave the way for a national dialogue. Representatives of trade unions, as well as persons from religious, academic, and civil society sectors, are attending the meeting. However, some organizations such as the Haitian People's Sector declined the president's invitation, noting that key opposition members were left out of the talks. On Saturday, the Caribbean community, CARICOM, called on all political stakeholders in Haiti to act responsibly, following deadly protests aimed at forcing President Moïse out of office. Guyana has received $18 million in aid to help set up a number of mega solar farms. This as part of a $250 million deal Guyana signed with Norway in 2009 to preserve the South American nation's Amazon rainforest. The money will be used to provide at least 30 megawatts of solar power, which already generates electricity for dozens of indigenous communities in Guyana. Guyana is trying to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels, although it will be likely become an oil producer by 2020 following recent discoveries of large quantities of oil and gas.
Acquisition of funds.
Pleased to say that the UAE fund funding has been approved, and then with that funding we are seeking to make Wakenham one of the first totally green off-grid centers. That will be a hybrid system.
St. Kitts and Nevis' Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris has held bilateral talks with his Jamaican counterpart Andrew Holmes. The 2 Caribbean leaders also addressed a number of matters of regional importance. The brief discussions were held while Prime Minister Harris was on an official visit to Jamaica. Dr. Harris also signed a condolence book in honor of former Prime Minister Edward Seaga, who will be laid to rest on June 23rd. Coming up after the break, with over 90% of votes counted, Guatemala is heading to a runoff presidential vote. Don't go away. Welcome back. In Argentina, authorities have reportedly managed to restore power following a massive outage that left tens of millions in Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay without electricity. Power has also returned to Uruguay as well as to people in neighboring Paraguay. The exact cause behind the failure in the country's power grid remains unknown, but Argentine officials say the failure originated at a transmission point between the power stations in the country's northeast. Our correspondent in Montevideo, Mateo Grille, has more on the blackout.
An unprecedented blackout with the complete shutdown of the electrical grid affected more than 50 million people and left all of Argentina and Uruguay without power, as well as some areas of Brazil and Paraguay too, due to their interconnected electrical systems. By Sunday afternoon, Uruguay had recovered much of its service, but by now it still stands at 99.5%. But officials at UT say there could be intermittent outages in some areas. On the other hand, the weather in Uruguay has been stormy in the last few days, which will continue into this week. There have been several floods in coastal areas and the southwest of the country where people have had to evacuate. If this continues, we will see more evacuations.
And from Paraguay, our correspondent Vzla has more on the effects of the power outage from Asunción, as well as severe flooding in the South American country.
Greetings from Asunción, Paraguay. Yesterday, the South American country was affected by the massive power outage in Argentina, which affected several provinces in the country and all of Uruguay. In Paraguay, the two departments of Genbocu and Misiones were affected, as was reported by the National Administration of Electricity. Several districts of these departments were left without electricity for around half an hour. On the other hand, the drama of the floods continues. Only in Asunción, 13,000 are still living in shelters due to the rising water in the Paraguayan River. The Department of Medical Emergencies, as well as the municipality of Asunción, have around 100 shelters where families are living due to this problem. The National Department of Meteorology reports a significant decrease in the level of the river and is now at the level it was at 1 month ago. However, this decrease and projection does not allow the families to return to their homes. Other departments are also affected by the rising of the rivers, the main ones being the Paraná and the Paraguay rivers. Some of these departments are under a 90-day emergency declaration. So, according to authorities, although the rivers are returning to their levels, families cannot go back to their homes to carry out their normal lives. This is all we have from here. Back to the studios.
We thank Osvaldo for that report. Now to Guatemala, where with over 90% of votes counted, it seems the country is heading to a runoff presidential vote. Former First Lady Sandra Torres took the lead with 24% of the vote, followed by four-time candidate Alejandro Yamatei with 15% of the vote. Because no candidate secured more than 50%, a second round between the top two finishers is necessary. The runoff vote is expected to take place on August 11th. Sunday's elections were marked by absenteeism as rates surpassed 40% of eligible voters. Close to 8 million people took part in the polls contested by 19 candidates.
We are in the lead thanks to a political project that we've been building for years. It didn't happen overnight. You can't improvise a political project. That is why today we have this result. Look at the state, the country. Look at the results this government has had after simply improvising. Guatemala isn't up for more political misadventures.
But election day did not go by without issues, as the Supreme Electoral Court suspended elections in the municipality of San Jorge in the department of Zacapa due to security concerns. The Interior Minister announced that the electoral board in the municipality walked off their post after receiving death threats. Earlier, we were joined live by Daniel Pereira, a Guatemala researcher and activist. He spoke to us about the many issues reported throughout Election Day.
We've been hearing about various reports throughout the day. It's nothing that we haven't heard in previous elections. There's been several irregularities, some concerning previously marked ballots that were reported by several civilians in different locations. Like you mentioned and just previously, one of the municipalities had to cancel the election altogether because of threats to the volunteers who were presiding over the electoral process in that municipality. And more worrisome is what we've been hearing over the past couple of weeks regarding irregularities to do with the possibility of buying votes with public funds. And I think that's what you were referring to in the previous segment, that, the president was questioned with regard to that. It's just been an overall very unusual and very atypical electoral process up to the last few days.
El Salvador's FMLN party held internal elections on Sunday to choose new party leaders. We have more in this report.
Former President of El Salvador, Oscar Ortiz, was one of the candidates who ran for the position of Party Secretary General. His campaign message focused on reviving the FMLN party in the face of poor results in the previous elections. He called his campaign message the agenda for real change.
To not only recover, but to strengthen, integrate, energize, unify, and generate an FMLN that is much more connected to the family, community, and grassroots. An FMLN that is much more open, much more inclusive. An FMLN that reconquer the work with young people.
Party members were able to cast their votes in the 267 polling stations that were open throughout the country in 262 municipalities.
We have had reports from the 14 departments. There is a great influx of voters. That is important for us, to emphasize that there is a lot of combativity, a lot of joy, a lot of enthusiasm. And it is worth highlighting for those who consider that the FMLN is dead. We are more alive and red than ever.
Voting began at 8 a.m. and the polls closed at 4 p.m. In these 8 hours, members of the FMLN sought to give a new pulse to the party, with focus not only on giving the party a new direction, but also on generational change in leadership, which was demonstrated by an increase in the number of candidates running for political office for the first time.
A new leadership that is going to be renewed by 60 to 70%, not only with young people, but also with many women, many revolutionaries of different generations, and other comrades who have returned to register. That is to say, a recomposition is being made, but with a cause.
This year's election was tightly contested, and for the first time in history, there was a female candidate running for the position of Secretary General. The Electoral Commission was expected to announce the victorious candidate for the position of party's Secretary General by Sunday evening. The results for the other positions are expected to be announced in the coming days.
Coming up after the break, China's president is set to start a two-day visit to North Korea. Stay with us. Welcome back. Colombian President Iván Duque has arrived to the UK for an official visit, where he was received by protesters outside the Colombian embassy in London. Asesino! 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 Protesters shouted "murderer" at Duque as he entered the embassy before he set off to meet with outgoing PM Theresa May. Duque has objected to several parts of the 2016 peace agreement as the death toll on social leaders in Colombia rises every day. Protesters held signs with the names of the hundreds of social leaders killed in Colombia. Iran has announced that it will pass a limit set under the 2015 nuclear deal on its stockpile of enriched uranium on June 27th. Iran's Atomic Energy Agency says they've quadrupled production of the material, which is used to make reactor fuel and potentially nuclear weapons. Nonetheless, authorities added that there's still time for European countries to uphold the deal by protecting Iran from reinstated U.S. sanctions. The deal required Iran to curb its uranium enrichment capacity in return for the removal of most international sanctions.
From the 27th of June, we will bypass the 300 kilograms limit for enrichment. We will not only bypass this limit, but the production levels will increase significantly. Once we bypass the limit, we will also be able to increase the rate of low uranium enrichment at the level of 3.67.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to start a two-day visit to North Korea on Thursday. This will be the first visit of a Chinese head of state to the DPRK in 14 years. The two leaders are scheduled to exchange views on the situation in the Korean Peninsula and push for a new resolution on it. The countries have been working to improve relations over the past year after Beijing decided to back a series of UN sanctions against Pyongyang over its nuclear activities. The visit comes on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the establishment of China-DPRK diplomatic ties. At least 30 people have been killed in a triple suicide bombing in northeast Nigeria as they were watching a televised football match. Another 40 have been injured. According to officials, the owner of the hut prevented one of the bombers from entering the packed venue just before he blew himself up. The two other bombers who had mingled among the crowd at a tea stall nearby then also set off their suicide vests. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack as of yet. On June 16, 1976, thousands of students in the Black township of Soweto took part in a mass demonstration against the government's decision to put Afrikaans, seen as the language of the oppressor, as the official language in schools. Paul Lakachi talked to some of the leaders who organized the demonstration, which came to be known as the Soweto Uprising.
One Sunday in the winter of 1976, student leaders gathered at this community hall in Soweto. They discussed a controversial announcement that had been made by the Department of Bantu Education. Afrikaans would be the official language of instruction in black schools.
The minister that really pushed that a concept or pushed that legislation for implementation was Minister MC Botha.
This meant school subjects like mathematics, geography and history would now have to be taught in Afrikaans. That language had negative connotations at schools like Orlando High in Soweto.
Black people had 3 languages to study. It was your mother tongue, it was English, and then it was the language of the oppressor, which is Afrikaans.
When Afrikaans was now imposed in all our schools, I was one of those who felt frustrated. You know, you could see the doors of learning shutting in front of your eyes to say, how am I going to be taught in Afrikaans that I don't even know? I'm struggling with the language, right? It is not my mother tongue, you know, it's not even my second language.
Students then reached out to the authorities in an attempt to voice their concerns.
That's when I took the initiative, therefore, to say, what about communicating, you know, with the then Minister of Bantu Education to say, can you explain, you know, what are you trying to achieve? And of course, one expected the Minister of Bantu Education, first of all, to look at the letter itself, you know, correct the grammar, then give me a call and say, hey, let's sit down and explain what we are happening, or what was happening at that time. But he decides to send the police to come and arrest me.
After Enos Ngujane was picked up from Naledi High by the police, his schoolmates became extremely angry. In the days that followed, students took a decision to demonstrate on these streets of Soweto. At that stage, they were fighting not only against Afrikaans, they wanted racial segregation to be completely abolished. On the 16th of June 1976, crowds of learners from different schools gathered and snaked through Soweto, swelling to thousands. But in no time, the police were at the scene and ordered the marchers to disperse. The students were relentless.
They then released dogs. The only defense against those police dogs was stones. So students used stones to kill the dogs. And a dog that died and made the police to start even wanting to use live bullets.
In the ensuing chaos, the police opened fire, and 13-year-old Hector Peterson was among the first children to be gunned down. The image was published around the world. The international community began to pressurize the apartheid government to abandon its racist policies. Today, South Africa is a free country, and a monument has been built to honor the hundreds of students who died in 1976. But there's no doubt it was that demonstration that became a turning point in the fight against apartheid. Mpolagaje, Telesu, Soweto.
And from the 2019 Cricket World Cup in the United Kingdom, Bangladesh beat West Indies by 7 wickets. Shakib Al Hassan's blistering century and a superb 94 from Liton Das earned Bangladesh a stunning victory that puts them back in the top 4 race. Set 322 for victory, the Tigers made a rapid start but lost 2 quick wickets to leave the game evenly poised at 133-3 of 19 overs. But Shakib took apart West Indies' one-pace attack, reaching his second successive century of the tournament of 83 balls. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.